Welcome to Planet X News. This is Scott from the Nibiru channel. I'd like to welcome all of you. I have my special guests, Chris Potter, and I have our physicist on board. And we're going to have a 2-hour discussion, and we're going to cover a lot of material dealing with Planet X, my investigations and research. The same thing will apply with Chris, but mostly we want to center our attention on all of the research and all of the papers that have been written by our physicist. And she holds a PhD and also a doctorate, and this is a very, very educated lady. He has been teaching and lecturing for over 17 years at a major university, and she deserves all of the respect that we can give her pertaining to this subject. The respect for just her accomplishments as an individual and her education. So we're going to be referring to her as Doctor, and we're going to be referring to Chris as Mr. Potter. So what's happening, Chris? What's happening?
Not much. I'm excited to be here. Myself, you, Steve Olson, Arlene Steiger have been the voice of the physicist, the doctor, and this is our first opportunity to allow her to speak and share, her experience, because I think that that's going to bring a lot of power to this subject and clarity, and also it will allow her and validate her work. I think that we haven't had an opportunity to really do that where she can represent herself in her own forum. So I'm really excited to be here today.
Yes, yeah, I absolutely agree. Yeah, I absolutely agree. I believe that she deserves the respect and the platform to at least voice her opinion and her studies and her research. So we're going to start touching on a few subjects. But first, I don't want to go directly into the Planet X or the brown dwarf investigations. But ladies and gentlemen, I want you to open up your eyes and I want you to listen to me very, very carefully. Now, going back a few weeks ago, this lady and her job, well, it was in jeopardy. Simply because the trolling operations that are conducted on YouTube every second of the day, anything that has to do with the truth, anything that has to do with Planet X, as we call it, there are these factions that try to shut it down. Now, these are very well-organized operations, ladies and gentlemen. These are not just some geeks sitting behind a computer with nothing to do. We've uncovered this information back in September of 2016. I covered it again in November of 2016. I covered it again in January of 2017. And the fact of the matter is, there are several countries that participate in this kind of secret operation. They actually have a handbook, and we exposed that handbook several months ago, and I guess it kind of put a bad taste in their mouth. Well, we'll leave this one individual's name completely out of this, but an email was sent to the university where she works, and they tried to actually have her fired. After 17 years of teaching, after 17 years of her education and employment and establishing herself, she started to notice things in the sky. Things were changing. So she started her own investigation, much like myself and Chris and many others that are on YouTube. And we take a lot of abuse each and every minute of the day, but that's okay. We can deal with that. But whenever you go after someone's career, that is saying something. That is saying one thing and one thing only. That now all of a sudden, there is someone with a super education, credibility, that is stepping up and bringing a lot of this information to the forefront. This email was sent directly to the university, and the information that was sent into this email was rather damning and ignorant. So we've worked on that. There is no longer a threat for this beautiful woman's job. And we're going to continue to uncover and investigate and research this information. Number one, because we have the right to. Number two, it's the right thing to do. That's the bottom line. So no matter what occurs, we are always going to be threatened. We're always going to be under the gun of being shut down by YouTube or whoever. And they've come after my channel. They've come after Chris's channel. They've gone after many, many other channels on YouTube. I just received an email 30 minutes before this broadcast that these trolling operations are now going to target Mike from Around the World, BP Earthwatch, Pastor Paul Begley, the Higher Truth channel, and a few other channels. They've basically created a hit list. Now, ladies and gentlemen, why would people go to these extents to shut down a YouTube channel and shut down a flow of information? I mean, that right there has to tell you something. We're not just making videos for the hell of it. We're making videos and producing this information so the world population can see what's occurring. So we're going to get right into a little question and answer. Doctor, how are you today?
I'm fine, thank you, Scott. Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. Absolutely my pleasure. What I wanted to first ask you is, in one of our conversations, you had mentioned, you know, how you walk and you've started noticing different things in the sky, the pink sunsets, which we've all seen pink sunsets, but then you started to notice other things. So I'm going to go ahead and give you the floor for a few minutes and let you begin from your beginning.
Okay, so what I was doing is I was walking. I was just having my normal walk at sunset. And I noticed that as the sun was setting, that everywhere else, north, east, west, the sky was not like it was supposed to be. It looked red. All around at the horizon, it looked red. And the clouds at sunset were strange colors. They looked very red. And I thought, this is not right. This is not the way things are supposed to be. This looks like there are other objects illuminating these clouds. This is what I thought. And this was around July, August last year that I started noticing this. And I thought, this is very strange. This is not normal. And then one day I actually saw an object up in the sky. And it quickly got covered. I did know about chemtrailing before that, but I didn't realize that hiding these objects and chemtrailing was connected. So this object just went behind the clouds, and I thought, wow, I just saw something that was not supposed to be there. And then I started looking into it. I started trying to find out if other people were seeing this anywhere else in the world. And then I came across Steve Olson, and I started watching his channel, and I started seeing what other people were seeing. And I started thinking about it. I mean, my training in physics allows me to look at certain observations and come up with deductions. And that's how I started. I didn't plan to. I just wanted to find out what was going on. And then I started writing to Steve and making some suggestions. And eventually I started writing articles for him. And then Chris was interviewed by Steve, and I started watching Chris's channel, and I thought his pictures were amazing, absolutely amazing. I mean, there were pictures with 3 stars in them. And I was amazed by these pictures. And then I saw that Chris was continuously attacked by the fact that people were saying these were lens flares. So one of the first articles I wrote for Chris was the one about lens flares. And I was hoping to help these people that were putting out this information that no one else seemed to care about. It was not in the media. And this seemed to be an extremely important thing that was happening in the solar system. So I went on from there, and I started thinking more and more about what was going on. Eventually, I got to the STO eclipse season. And that to me was the turning point, because I realized that these images were showing that the sun was going dark. It was not being eclipsed. So when I realized that the sun was going dark, I thought, but if this, according to the theories that I learned and that I teach my own students, it is impossible. The sun is powered by thermonuclear reactions. There is no way it is ever going to go dark. So I realized that the theories that I have to explain what powers the sun are wrong, because I believe that normal physics should be driven by observation, not theory. Nowadays, though, most physicists will deny an observation because it doesn't go with the theory. But I don't believe that's the way physics is supposed to be. So when I realized that the sun was going dark, I realized that the theory was wrong, and I had to come up with a new one. And I also realized that there must be an object that is causing the sun to go dark. And from there, I started thinking about brown dwarf stars that mainly emit infrared radiation and are quite dense. And I started thinking about the electric theory for powering stars. But I realized that stars have to be powered by a combination of electricity and thermonuclear reactions. But the thermonuclear reactions have to be on the surface of the star, not in the interior. So that's started. From then on, I started building up my theories and writing more and more articles. And I believe Chris has now about 90 of them. So I could say I've become a prolific writer. I cannot say that I ever planned to. I just desire to understand what is going on. And I have come to the conclusion that there are several stars around the sun, that the sun seems to be attracting these stars. Some of them are brown dwarf stars. I have examined an image where I could see there were about 3 of them in this image. And I always recognize brown dwarf stars by the fact that they are dark, and possibly they may start emitting some visible light because of being in the solar system and absorbing energy from the sun. But they are always enveloped in a cloud of ionized gas, because that's what's left from them going through their white dwarf stage after being a main sequence star, going through the red giant phase, and then reaching the end of their lives by running out of nuclear fuel. They then release their outer layers of gas, and this outer layer of gas is basically plasma. So what is left around the star is this gaseous cloud of plasma that does not glow as much as it did when it was part of the star, because the star doesn't have the power or the fuel anymore, but it's still ionized, and you can still get it to illuminate and discharge. You can still have plasma discharges across this cloud. And the most interesting, the most mind-blowing thing for me was discovering the 2007 footage of that object that traversed the sun. Because that object, when I looked closely at that image, was dark and enveloped in a cloud of ionized gas. And to me, that was proof, mind-blowing proof, that what I had been thinking was happening was actually happening. This was really a picture of a brown dwarf star. Now, you have to remember that these kinds of brown dwarf stars that I'm talking about have actually been removed from, because the literature now says that you go from a white dwarf star to a black dwarf star. The brown dwarf star in the middle is not even mentioned. Instead, people talk about brown dwarfs, which are substellar objects that are more like gas giants like Jupiter than anything else. These are not objects that were ever main sequence stars and became brown dwarf stars. That's why I differentiate between the two objects. There's the brown dwarf, and I believe there is probably at least one of them amongst all these objects that have come into the solar system, because they are pictures of a striped object or large planet. But the main culprit for what's happening in the solar system and to our sun is the extra stars and the brown dwarf stars that have come into the solar system. So I don't know what else you want me to talk about, but this is my main, I concentrate on this. This is what's leading my thoughts. I don't even want to call it research. I never intended it to become a research project. I simply wanted to understand and help people understand what's going on in the solar system. And the powers that be are trying to hide it from people.
Well, there's absolutely no doubt about that. There is no doubt that they are trying to hide everything. And I just want to make one quick comment.
Yes.
I've read probably more than half of your research papers, and I've been following Chris, and we became friends, and we've collaborated on this subject. And after watching and listening to his presentations and listening to the papers that you have written, I would have to say more than 90% of it is directly my thoughts also. However, yours are a lot more, scientific than what I could ever come up with. But, after getting to know you over the last few weeks and being able to speak with you and get to know you, I can clearly see that you have the same passion that all of us have. And that's just we're seeking the truth. We are in a very damning situation as far as humanity. I mean, the bottom line is we're not going to save the planet, but at least we could, get the word out and start to awaken people to what is exactly happening around the world. Because mainstream media, I don't really want to get into all of that, but the mainstream media, we really can't believe they're not going to go out there and investigate this like we are. But one thing that I do want to touch on, and I've had a lot of emails over the last couple of days, and we have a lot of people, other people on YouTube that claim to have credentials, and they call themselves amateur astronomers, and that whole gambit. But what I wanted to ask you is, if you don't mind, discussing your education level, from heading into college and acquiring the degrees and the education, and that way we can give everybody a good sense of your qualifications to speak on this subject.
Okay, thank you, Scott. Well, maybe I should start with my school education. My parents moved around a lot. So I never went to one school for more than 2 years, to international school. So you will never place my accent, because it's a mixture of European and all kinds of other accents. But so when I was 6 years old, I decided I wanted to become an astronomer. But when I started university, the university where I went to did not offer astronomy. So I decided, well, there's no astronomy, so I'll just do physics. So I started physics. I did my undergraduate degree. I did what they call the honors degree, which is the 4th year. I went on and I did a master's degree in pure physics, theoretical physics. And then I did my PhD in theoretical particle physics. Later on, I did another master's degree in science education, because I enjoy lecturing and teaching. So I have 2 master's degrees and a PhD. I've been teaching for 17 years. I enjoy teaching. I enjoy dealing with my students. And perhaps that's one of the things that I enjoy doing with YouTube, is it allows me to teach people, lay people. And I try to make my articles simple to understand. I work hard on making them accessible to everybody. And I think physics is for everybody. It should be interesting for everybody. And everybody should have access to understanding what's going on. And I realized that most of the physics that's published in journals is way too complicated for normal people to access. And even for a physicist moving into a new field, it's quite a battle to learn all the terminology and all the formalism.
So let me back up for just one moment. So you stated that you have 2 master's degrees.
That's right, I do.
Wow. Well, all righty then.
Thank you.
Not only does this lady have 1 master's degree, but she holds 2 master's degrees.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And she's considered a doctor and a teacher.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. You know what? My hats off to you. I mean, that is very, very respectable. And it's also amazing that at one point in time that you actually wanted to be an astronomer. So
that's right.
So the solar system, the stars, the galaxy, and the universe is no stranger to your subject of study.
Not at all. I've been interested in astrophysics for many years. And in my 4th year, I did a course in stellar evolution, which I really enjoyed. And that always stayed with me. And so my understanding of brown dwarf stars actually started there, because that was part of stellar evolution and what was taught then. So, yeah, I always remembered that. And I've always been interested in astrophysics. I haven't, I don't know some of the basic stuff in astronomy. I probably know more astrophysics than astronomy. I have taught my students a little bit of astronomy. So, I've always been interested. And my students were always fascinated about the size of the sun, compared to the Earth and things like that. And I always use that in my lectures.
Well, I can tell you this much. Even just hearing the word astrophysics sends chills up my spine, because, I was always, I was always interested in Earth space science. And I always would look up, and gaze at the stars. And, I always had a fascination with it. But I never possessed the mathematical skills that it takes to, go to college, gain a degree, let alone 2 master's degrees. I mean, listen, I'm going to be quite frank. You're a very intimidating person when it comes to your education level.
Well,
but this is something that everyone needs to know when we're talking about this subject, because it's a very sensitive subject. It's very hard to investigate, because it just seems that it's an uphill battle with gaining the information. And then whenever you do have the information and you try to put it out there, once again, you have the naysayers that will just crucify you and call you a liar, a fake, a fraud. I mean, everything under the sun. And then they think that you're making tens of thousands of dollars deceiving people. Well, you have no monetary gain whatsoever. You don't have a YouTube channel. You don't own a website. You're just a professor and a woman with a considerable amount of knowledge in the subject. Now, what I want to get into is, I know that you've been writing the papers that WSO has used, and Chris has used, and not too long ago, I turned Chris on to that stereo footage from 2007 that showed that what looked to be a planet orbiting the sun, I think it was in about 24 hours or 48 hours. I forget how fast it went around the sun. And when that footage was leaked to me, I was pretty thrown back when I saw that. And I didn't know whether or not I should publish that information into a video, but the more and more I studied that stereo imaging from those dates in February of 2007, I started to put some things together myself. It took me about a week, and I looked at further footage, and I just could not help myself to think that, okay, what I'm looking at is not the planet Mercury. It is definitely not the Earth. It's definitely not Venus. And I started to wonder, okay, what is this? So I put it out there in a video, and immediately, I would have to say within hours, I was attacked by every trolling organization and group on YouTube. And then I came across a few individuals that tried to convince me that it was our moon. The moon belongs to the Earth. And I was told specifically, yes, I was told specifically that was the moon. And well, naturally, I didn't buy that mathematically. It's impossible, you know, physically, astronomically, that was impossible. Well, a few days later, a computer model was generated by these individuals. They made it, and then they tried to make me believe that this object was the moon orbiting the sun at that speed and in that fashion. Well, I'm not stupid, and as I further investigated it, I knew for a fact that it wasn't any planet in our solar system, and I knew that it had to be some type of, I'll just use the word rogue object that came into our solar system. It reacted, or the sun reacted to its presence in that very fast orbit. So whenever I turned the footage over to Chris, I told him, I said, Chris, I want you to get this information to the physicist that you're working with, and I want you to ask her if she could please analyze it for me. And he did. And whenever you saw that footage from the stereo in 2007, I want you to tell everyone what you thought and what your observations were.
Okay. Well, first of all, Scott, I'd like to thank you, because that actually was mind-blowing for me. I'm very thankful for what I discovered there. But as I look at images, I analyze them very carefully. I look at every detail, and I think about what's going on here. So I looked, first of all, at the object in the SETI images where it's approaching the sun, and you can actually see the sun. You can see the object just before it enters the sun's corona. And I saw that the object was dark there. So that told me it wasn't emitting light. I then saw as it moved into the sun's corona, it started, there was light around the edges. So in one of the wavelengths where the sun looks yellow, you can see red around the edges of the object. And you can see that it changes in each image. It's not always the same, depending on probably how much radiation, and it's ultraviolet radiation, the object is in. Because what that shows is the object is actually reflecting light around its edges. So in order for us to be able to see that light coming off the object has to actually be immersed inside the inner corona of the sun, where this radiation is being emitted. So from that, I realized that this object is extremely close to the sun as it traverses the sun. And I studied it carefully, image by image. And I studied it in the different wavelengths. And I realized, okay, so this object is very close to the sun. That's amazing, because now that I know it's very close to the sun, I can calculate how large it is. And you can, just by looking at it, realize that it's about 1/6 the size of the sun. Immediately you can compare it with Jupiter, because Jupiter is 1/10 the size of the sun. So that makes this object 1.7 times the size of Jupiter, or nearly twice as large as Jupiter. So that's already an amazing result. But then as I started looking at the core 2 images, and I saw the object approaching, making its loop around, and it reverses the sun on the 25th of February of 2007. And as I saw it approaching from the 20th of February, I realized, as I started looking carefully at the image, and I made it as large as I could. And when I looked at it, I just couldn't believe what I saw. This object was dark, but there seemed to be light emitting from it from one side, because it looked pink on one side. So I looked at it as large as I could get it, and I could see, okay, but this is a cloud. It actually looks white or pink around the object, making a sort of a ring around it and emitting light on one side. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is the cloud of ionized gas. I was ecstatic, because this is proof that these objects are in the solar system. And this is an object that is so large. I mean, it's nearly twice as large as Jupiter. This is the kind of size we would expect a brown dwarf star to be, where the core, the dark object, is the core of the star, and it's very dense because it's made up of whatever fuel the star ended up with that could no longer fuse. And it's obviously more dense than hydrogen. So the star is denser than normal stars. And so it will look smaller, even though it may have a larger mass than the sun. It could actually. So
you know what I wanted to ask you real quick. The stereo imaging, the stereo imaging from 2007. What was the beginning date as it entered into the view of the camera system? I'm going to show it to everyone. Was it
I think it's
2007 February?
It's about the 20th, the 19th or the 20th of February.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and you could go ahead and continue. I'm going to go ahead and pull that imagery up so everyone can see.
Okay, that would be good, Scott. Yes, this made my year, believe me, to find this object, the proof that, and it's in the inner solar system. Now, there are people that say that when an object of this size comes into the solar system, it will destroy the solar system. It will eject planets from the solar system and so on. But the observation now is we find this object in the inner solar system, and our planetary system, the solar system, is still intact. What does that tell us? It tells us that the gravitational theory that these models are based on does not power what we see happening in the solar system. It is other forces that are acting in planetary systems that are keeping them together, that are putting planets in certain stable orbits, and that are even attracting stars to come in towards our sun. It looks like our sun is attracting other stars because there are, as far as I know, quite a few around it now. And this object is obviously attracted to the sun. So to me, it's the observation that makes me then realize that I have to make a deduction and come up with a theory to explain it. And obviously, the fact that it's all about the gravitational theory. The gravitational theory is actually quite a weak interaction. The electric force is much stronger, and the strong nuclear force is even stronger. And I've known for quite a while that the electric force may play a large part in how planets move. So I knew about that, but recently I've been thinking that how these stars are attracted to each other. And remember, I wrote an article about the sun jolting, and I believe the sun jolting is when of these stars approach it and they repel each other, because stars are both positively charged and they should repel each other. But yet they still are attracted to each other and are sticking together in the inner solar system. And what does that tell me? That tells me that possibly the strong interaction is acting on an astronomical basis, that stars are acting like protons in the nucleus, and they are attracting each other just like protons in the nucleus attract each other, which is what keeps nuclei together. So this is, again, mind-blowing, and it's all built out of observation, out of what is happening in the inner solar system. And this is probably why they want to hide it from us so much, because it changes the physics that we use to understand the universe. The universe is no longer what I thought it was. It's something totally different. Can you imagine that planetary systems and atoms obey exactly the same rules, the same laws, the same interactions, or we see them microscopically in atoms and we see them in planetary systems? This is mind-blowing. No one has ever taught on this, as far as I know.
Okay, I pulled up the actual footage, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And this is the footage that we're referring to from 2007.
Okay.
And this is the stereo behind core 2, and it's dated for February 23rd, 2007.
That's when it starts.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and just speed that up just a little bit, and I'm just going to go ahead and let that continue to loop through, because whenever I initially saw this, I was, I was pretty thrown back by, what I saw, and even still today.
Yes.
It's been many months, since discovering this, and I still can't stop thinking how extraordinary this is, but yet, it is very damning piece of evidence. But let me go ahead and make sure that this is being shared. And I'll present that to everyone so they can see what we're viewing.
Okay.
This was from the brown dwarf star traverses the sun presentation. Is that right?
That's right. That's right, Chris.
Okay. And so it looked like it started around the 20. I think you have it documented.
On the 20th is when I took that picture.
That's right. Okay. So things started on the 20th. Excuse me.
Yes.
That document has a little bit more dates and pictures, etc. Now, Scott's obviously showing the video, so it brings a lot more.
Yeah, you see it at the beginning there. You actually see that it looks like it's emitting light because it's pink on the side facing away from the sun. There you go. And that's what I started looking at. And I realized that what's emitting light is not the object, but the cloud around it. When I looked at it there, I zoomed in on it.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and present this again to make sure everybody can see it. It's having a little trouble getting that to show up.
Yeah.
So, Doctor, what you were referring to earlier regarding that force, you had called it a strong force in your latest article that I put out right before our hangout, which is there a large object close to the Earth? And I just wanted to read the conclusion
Yes.
because I thought that was appropriate. So the question is then, why has this star not caused absolute chaos in the solar system? I think that the reason has to be that the gravitational force is not the driving force in planetary systems, but that the electromagnetic theory, is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, the electromagnetic force, which is the electric and the magnetic combined. But basically, it is more of the electric force that I'm referring to there.
Okay, and right after that it says, and possibly the strong force may be playing a much larger part. Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, you may continue, but it's the strong force that is now totally fascinating to me. That
absolutely.
If two positive objects attract each other, the only way I can explain that is the strong force, which we see acting in that same way inside the nucleus. That's what keeps the nucleus together, because you have protons and neutrons in the nucleus. Neutrons are neutral, protons are positive. Positive charges repel each other because of the electric force or the electric interaction. And the only thing that keeps the nucleus from flying apart because of this electric interaction between the protons, that where they repel each other, is the strong force. Right. And the strong force keeps the nucleus together. Without the strong force, we would not have a universe, because we would have no nuclei. We would have no helium, nothing above hydrogen that only has one proton in its nucleus. So when I start seeing all these stars being attracted to the sun, and when I start seeing, because in that article I calculated the mass that this object just behind the Earth may have, and I associated to the SDO eclipse season, where you have to have an object that has a period of 361 days, which would make it very close to the Earth's orbit. And then I just decided, well, maybe this is that object. So when I used that and I calculated the mass of the object, I got a mass that's 4 times the mass of the sun. So if we have an object right behind the Earth that has 4 times the mass of the sun, and it could well be a brown dwarf star, because remember, they're very dense, so they could look smaller than the sun and have a mass that's greater than the sun. So, but if we have an object that's very close to the Earth and has 4 times the mass of the sun, wouldn't we expect something dramatic to happen to the solar system and our planet? We would, if we thought that it's only about gravitation, and gravitation is all about mass. But I think I've seen enough observations to realize that it's not all about gravitation, that other forces are more of a factor in what's happening in the solar system. So that is why I came up with the idea, look, it must be It must be that the strong force is attracting these stars to the sun. And therefore, it is possible that these objects do not interact with planets the same way that they would if it was just a gravitational force. Because planets are negatively charged and stars are positively charged. They should attract each other. But we have other interactions going on, like I mentioned, the strong force. That's the interaction I know about. It could be there's even a more complex interaction going on here. I don't know. I have knowledge of the strong force, and therefore that's what I use in my explanation. Do you want to go on and read the rest, Chris?
Yeah, so I wanted to make sure that I verified the terminology with you, what you were referring to as the strong force. Okay, so I'll just reread this. The question is then why the star has not caused absolute chaos. I think the reason has to be that the gravitational force is not the driving force in planetary systems, like you said, but that the electromagnetic and possibly the strong force may be playing a much larger part. I mentioned the strong force because that seems to be the only possible reason why stars are being attracted to our star and are now orbiting it in large numbers. This is an indication that stars may behave like protons do in a nucleus. They repel each other because of the electrostatic force, but they attract each other because of that strong force. I wanted to emphasize that because I was able to bridge the gap between what Scott and you had discussed and what he's presenting now with my latest, with your latest article. I'd say my latest presentation, but it's not mine, it's yours. And
well,
I just wanted to make sure we tied the two together.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I wanted to make sure we tied the two together so it actually made sense and what, like in layman's terms, etc. So thank you for letting me interrupt both of you. I'll be quiet now.
No, you guys go ahead and continue. I'm pulling this this video information so everybody.
So is this from? Okay, it's from the same time frame. We had looked at another channel as well that had some of this data. So what was interesting, just to back up regarding the 2007 footage that we're looking at now, there were like several different sources. So the doctor physicist had done several articles already on the exact same time frame. And then we came across a specific channel, and I believe it had something to the House of the Rising Suns, a 5-part series.
Yeah, it's Baby Blue, I think.
Exactly.
Baby Blue. Yeah.
And it was the exact same time frame. Yes. And it was creepy. And so to see that clearly there's an object. Now, what got it for me was that you had mentioned two things, that as well as she did, that it traverses the sun. Like, I don't know, was it 55 hours, 55 minutes? I forgot. I almost had it's the 55 memorized, but it was super fast. The time that it traverses the sun, as well as that it goes into the inner corona of the sun. And we shouldn't have any planets or moons that do that. Even Mercury doesn't do that?
Of course not. I mean, all the planets never go into the sun's inner corona. There is no way any planet, I mean, the planet would be basically fried if it ever did.
Thank you, for verifying that. That's why I mentioned it. Thank you.
Yeah, no planet can. And the other thing.
Sorry, I think there's a little bit of a delay. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Sorry. So no planet can go into the inner corona because they all have their orbits that are very far away from the sun's inner corona. Not even Mercury goes into the sun's inner corona. And the other thing is that this object is surrounded by a cloud of ionized gas, and there are no planets in the solar system surrounded in such a cloud. So it cannot be any object in the solar system.
And that cloud will reflect light?
Well, it doesn't reflect light. It's actually emitting light. As you can see, if it was reflecting... No, that's fine. But that's a good question, actually, because if the object was reflecting light, you would see light on the side facing the sun. But you don't. You see light on the side facing away from the sun. So
the accurate term, the accurate term I was looking for was that it was emitting light, not reflecting it. And how you explained that it's either facing towards or away from the sun. Can you go over that again?
Okay, so as you see, and Scott is showing the footage right now, and at the beginning on the 20th, you see that the object is illuminated, and it's illuminated on the side facing away from the sun. The side facing towards the sun, as you can see, and it gets increasingly dark as it gets closer to the sun, does not emit light. And it's actually very interesting that it gets dark as it approaches the sun. And that shows me the electric interaction. You see, the object that is emitting light is getting the power for that emission for the plasma discharges across the cloud comes from the object itself, which has its own electric field, like all stars do. And that electric field is generating enough power for those plasma discharges in the cloud. This is how all stars actually act, except the cloud now is further away and it's not condensed and right around the star like it should be. But as it approaches the sun, it gets increasingly darker, which shows you that this object goes into an absorbing mode, energy absorbing mode. It's no longer emitting and powering its own ionized cloud. It's going towards the sun. It can sense the sun's electric field and is now going into absorbing the sun's energy. Possibly where it got the energy by passing the sun. It probably has passed the sun a few times already by the time we see it in 2007, because as this star probably entered the solar system, it probably had no power at all, not even to create discharges across the cloud of ionized gas that surrounds it. But as it passes close to the sun, it starts to absorb some of the sun's energy. And then it starts increasing its own potential and its own electric field. And then it starts being able to ionize its own cloud, and the cloud starts producing light. And eventually, and as it has happened, I think, with some of the stars that have entered the solar system, probably before this one, they start to get such a potential, it gets high enough eventually, it absorbs protons from the solar wind, that eventually it is able to start thermonuclear reactions on its surface again. And now these stars start emitting light, possibly weak light initially, red light. They probably look and emit red light, and that may be why the clouds on Earth look so red at sunset, because of these stars that are around the sun and are emitting red light. As you can see, this object starts, and we can actually see it getting dark, and that shows me it's going into absorbing mode. It's absorbing the sun's energy. This is why the sun is getting weaker, because these stars are absorbing its energy. The sun is less bright. It's emitting less ultraviolet radiation. It's having more coronal holes. And I already thought about the next article I'm going to write. It's about explaining what coronal holes are. And I believe these coronal holes, and physics and astrophysics will tell you that coronal holes are places on the solar surface where you have open magnetic field lines. Now, all physicists know that there is no such thing as an open magnetic field line. Magnetic field lines always form closed loops. There is no such thing as an open magnetic field line. The magnetic field line may close somewhere very far away from the sun, but it will close somewhere. So I believe that the magnetic field lines open up because the sun's magnetic field is connecting to another object. Could be this connection could be like the magnetic portal connections that has been talked about, where you then get an intense flux of particles coming off the sun towards the other object through and in between these magnetic field lines that connect to the other object. So the more stars we have around the sun, the more coronal holes we are going to get, because the sun's magnetic field is connecting to the magnetic field of these other stars. And the sun, as the coronal hole opens, there's a flux of particles. The sun is losing a whole lot of fuel that way. That will increase the rate at which it is weakening. And of course, the other way it's weakening is it's just losing electric potential energy by just these objects passing close to it. So there are a couple of mechanisms here working together to weaken our sun, which is very concerning. But our sun is still emitting light. So I cannot say that it's going to die anytime soon, but we can definitely see that it is weakening.
Now, there was something that I want to go back to. And that is the discovery of this footage and this footage being exposed.
Yes.
Now, I had an individual that was emailing me back at the end of August, kind of someone that wanted to stay, you know, in the shadows. And they were sending me this video footage, but without a backstory.
Okay.
And then just about, oh, I'd say 3 weeks ago, I started to get these emails once again, but from another source, from another email address and another name. And the information that was contained in those emails was now giving me the backstory of this video footage and the other footage that was uncovered by this individual. So I looked into it, and what I found was the information contained in the email that was sent to me just recently was the truth. So it just so happens to be that a New York Times journalist back in 2004 began an investigation, a legitimate investigation on what was occurring, and started to do this investigation and started to uncover this footage. Now, she didn't publish this information in the New York Times, but what she did do is she recorded all of this, all of the different views, all of the information, and then she started to upload it to a website that she had developed. She was able to save all of the video footage. However, each and every time throughout 2007, when she was uncovering this information, as soon as she would upload this information onto this website, it was immediately removed. Now, I don't know about you, I don't know about anybody else, but it probably takes someone with some pretty good hacking skills to go into a website and remove things. Now, as fast as she was uncovering the information and publicizing it, that was as fast as they were removing it from this website. Then she decided to create a YouTube channel and started to publicize this information based on her thoughts. Now, taking into consideration, she was not an astronomer, not an astrophysicist, and probably didn't have much of a scientific background. However, she was a very accomplished journalist and still is. Now, unfortunately, none of this was removed from YouTube, and it basically stayed dormant for many years until it was uncovered. And when I was sent these emails directing me to this footage, I was pretty blown away. Now, at the time, back in 2016, I didn't know who this individual was. I didn't know who recorded this information. I didn't know who uploaded it to this YouTube channel. I didn't know who the owner and creator of this YouTube channel was, because, you know, it was under a fictitious name. But then a few weeks ago, when I received this secondary email giving me some background on this, and then I started to research into the email and into the information, I found it very credible, because I was able to find the individual who created this YouTube channel and was trying to expose this information. But I believe that back in this time, she was probably threatened and scared and totally abandoned her YouTube channel, and nothing has been uploaded since then. Now, there is another woman, and I don't want to divulge her YouTube channel because I don't want people to go and harass this channel. However, she uncovered a lot of the same footage, and also in the same time frame as what you're seeing here. And then mysteriously, this lady disappears. Disappears off the face of the earth. The YouTube channel still up, still running. You're able to view the videos, but nobody knew about it because they basically scared her off. And she has not uploaded anything for all of these years. And I was clued into her YouTube channel. And, you know, she went into talking about a lot of other subjects dealing with this footage and a lot of other very scary footage coming from the stereo images that, you know, I watched all of it, hours and hours of it. But I find it very mysterious how these two individuals started their investigations kind of at the same time. They were trying to divulge the information to the public, and somebody got to them. Somebody got to them, and, you know, I don't know what that backstory is, but they shut them down. They shut them down to the extent of, you know, I don't know if they were threatened. I don't know the backstory. However, the video footage is still up there on both of these YouTube channels. And when you watch it, it is absolutely undeniable. And for somebody to sit there and insult your intelligence by telling you that is the moon orbiting the sun in this fashion,
yes.
Well, you know, I just that kind of gets me a little, you know, a little disturbed because, I mean, ladies and gentlemen, the moon is approximately 238,000 miles from the Earth. The Earth is approximately 93 million miles from the sun. And again, you know, I was terrible at math and algebra, but putting these numbers together and just, you know, we all know the orbit of the Earth around the sun, 365 days. How is it physically possible for this, what we're viewing? How is that possible for it to be the moon? Because it has to be some other type of object. Now that we've moved into 2016 and 2017, and Lord knows how many Planet X channels there are out there on YouTube showing flares, you know, but the bottom line is there is a lot of credible evidence that goes back, you know, 5, 6, 7 years, 8 years now.
That's right.
So
and
you know, it's very
Scott,
hard to say that this is, you know, bogus information.
I just want you to notice something that happens here. As the object approaches the sun, you can see the bright corona actually moves from being below the sun, like it is now. Notice it moves up as the object approaches. Is the sun is reacting to this object. If this was a moon or any, there is no way the sun would react like this. This object has to be a star for the sun to interact with it in this way. You can see the corona moves upwards as if the sun is pushing its emission away from this object. And as the object is behind the occulter, and you actually see a dark shadow below the sun, because I believe at least part of the sun, maybe all of it, went completely dark. There are images missing in this footage. There's about 4 hours missing that they don't even show, because obviously the what happened with the sun was much more dramatic than what we can even see here. But we can see that a dark shadow appears below the sun. So the sun probably went dark as this object traversed. Its reaction was dramatic. There is no way the sun would react in the sun to a planet, to Mercury, to the moon, or anything like that. It's completely correct. There is no way that the moon can go into the sun's inner corona like this object obviously does. And you can actually see in the core 1 images as well. You've just seen there that shadow that appears below the sun. That's the sun going dark. And in the core 1 images, you can see the explosive reaction the sun has to this object coming right close to it. So in my articles, one of my articles at least, I use the core 1 images where you can see all this. It's a dramatic interaction that happens between these two objects. And this is obviously one of the objects that is draining the sun. And that's why I have so many articles about, there's the core 1. Yes. Okay, maybe some of the images are missing now, because in the ones I have, you could see a dramatic reaction from the sun. I'm not sure what's happening here because I didn't see it. But if you look at the images in my articles, they're all there. The sun actually goes dark and starts fluctuating in its emission. So I don't know if they've removed more images or not, but they're in my articles because I have copies of them.
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, we just caught them a few days ago, removing 4 hours of data from the magnetosphere, and once again, we're heading into this long phase again of all of these coronal holes constantly, just non-stop. One coronal hole after the next, one coronal hole after the next. And I've been studying this for a long time, and it just seems like now, throughout the year of 2016 and now moving into 2017, the coronal hole problem on the sun is just so erratic, but very consistent. And these coronal holes, I mean, there's scientific evidence out there that proves that, the solar wind coming from these coronal holes does have the ability to cause and create an uptick in earthquake activity. And today, doing my space weather report, the solar wind speed was down to about 385 kilometers per second. Within a matter of few hours, it was up to, I believe, 1.7 or 1.8 million miles per hour. But the other day, whenever we hit a solar, the solar wind speed was at 2.5 million miles per hour. There was about 4 hours of data that was removed from the magnetopause model. There were several YouTube channels that discovered it, and they reported on it, and this is just becoming the norm with them.
Oh, there it is. Sorry. Did you see the sun go dark there in the Core 1 image? There was at least one image where you can see it going dark. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah. Oh, there we go. Yeah,
I
like
have
to see that.
I have this sped up quite a bit. So everyone can see it. This is not in actual time. This is sped up quite a bit.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite amazing to to watch this and sit there and wonder, what's going on in our solar system.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the images are very doctored. It takes a lot of analysis sometimes for me to discover what's really going on. So with the object behind the Earth, it's definitely, there's something hidden in those images, and that large star appears as well. And well, I deduced that it has to be real. So it's a really large star orbiting the sun, and the object behind the Earth, all we see is a little dark area, but it's probably a lot larger than that. And I must say that sometimes I think it would be interesting to see what these images really look like before they manipulate them.
Yeah, before they're edited.
Yeah.
That's
so
exactly
that would be.
Yeah, that's exactly what they do. They edit this footage. Now, I was also told that NASA gets a normal feed to these cameras, meaning they don't get segments of every 12 minutes. They actually get what we would refer to as like real time, not segments, not frames that have to be pieced together. So therefore, if you're going to put, $1 billion satellite into space, why would you want photographs every 12 or 16 minutes? Because in those increments of time, you're going to miss something of importance. So I believe that we are shown this version, which is segmented, but still, they do miss a lot of things. And there was just some footage that came out a few years ago that someone uncovered where they were actually using Sharpie magic markers to color out and black out and then use contrast to hide things in these footages. I mean, it's all over YouTube. Nobody's going to sit there and go through all of that extent just to falsify that information, except you know who. Now there was one other question. Of course. There was one other question that I wanted to ask. And as of lately, the debunkers come out with they come out with this computer animated models and programs that are popping out of nowhere, and one of them shows that you're able to put a brown dwarf star into this program and then allow this brown dwarf star to infiltrate the inner solar system. And as you're watching the computer animation, it expels all of the planets out of the inner solar system. Now, in your research that you've done and your knowledge, wouldn't you have to have the exact compositions of these brown dwarfs in order to put that data into that model and then create the actual animation? And does a brown dwarf have the ability to expel planets out of their orbit and out of the solar system? And I mean, they showed these animations trying to debunk anything to do with Planet X. And here is the quote: "If there was a brown dwarf star in our solar system, it would have wrecked the entire solar system and ejected all of the planets out of the solar system." Your thoughts on that?
Well, you see, the models are built on one theory, and that is that the gravitational force is the only force driving the interaction between planetary systems and stars. So basically what they do is they input a certain mass and a certain trajectory for the brown dwarf, and the model calculates what happens, which is, if it's only gravity that's driving everything that's happening in planetary systems, then that's what would happen. The planets would all be ejected. But that is a theory. The gravitational theory of planetary interaction and so on, that's what it is. It's a theory. And all theories have to be driven by observation. Now, for years, we've had one star and a couple of planets in the solar system. And all the observations we had were that, well, it's okay. It could be just mass-driven. That is, the gravitational interaction and attraction between masses. It's possible that's the only thing that's causing our planets to orbit is the way they are. But now we have stars that have come into the solar system. How do we know they have come? Because we have observed them. This is observation. This observation is always where physics starts. We have now proved that there is a brown dwarf star in the inner solar system. This footage we're looking at right now is part of that proof. And this is evidence, observational evidence, for the fact that a brown dwarf came into the solar system and did not cause all the planets to be ejected. So what are we going to do? We're going to have to go back to the drawing board and come up with another theory, because the gravitational theory by itself will not do it anymore. So this is what it's all about. It's observation, not theory, because nowadays they have tried to make physics built on theories. Everything's on theory. Everything says, oh, there was the Big Bang model, and because there was the Big Bang model, there isn't enough time for white dwarf stars to cool down and become black dwarf stars. They even jumped the brown dwarf star stage. And physics is not built on theory. It's not built on these models that only use the gravitational force. It's built on observation. The observation says there's a brown dwarf star in the solar system. We have to believe the observation. I like to say observation is king. Theory serves it.
Now, if I have a question for you, and I want you to be very frank with me. I want you to just, I want you to be dead honest. If I stood in front of you, with your background, your academic, if I stood in front of you with what you know now, and I said to you, I know for a fact that there is no dwarf, there's nothing like this going on in our solar system, because I saw it. Now,
Scott, you're breaking up.
Now, first of all, how would somebody see the evidence? If I said to you that I know for a fact that this is not happening, what would you say?
Well, the thing is, you're negating something. If somebody says, I'm not seeing something, and I say, well, but I've seen it, you know, you only have to see one of them to realize that that person either has not looked closely enough, has not examined, or doesn't want to examine the observational evidence. In other words, what else can you do? I'll have to say, look, but I've seen it. You want to see? Look, here it is. I will show it to them. This is the proof. Look at this photograph. This is a brown dwarf star. And the person who doesn't want to believe, you cannot make them believe. You can show them, put it in front of their eyes, force their eyes open, but they will not say that they have seen it if they don't want to say it. And this is the way people are. What else can we do? But they are negating something for which there is direct observation that it does exist. And we have proof that it does. They are therefore basically lying. They
exactly. Exactly. That's what I wanted to get to.
Yeah, okay.
One thing that I do want to mention is everyone, they always say, well, how come astronomers are not making observations and not talking about this? How come astronomers are not divulging this information? Why is it that more professionals, astrophysicists, physicists, astronomers, I'm not talking about amateur astronomers, I'm talking about people that have absolute access to state-of-the-art technology, why do you think they are not publicly coming out and saying, listen, everyone, this is the issue that we have in the solar system. It's a bad issue, and we should at least start to prepare. Why do you think there is such the big cover-up?
Well, first of all, most astronomers know there is something going on. Okay, they have heard some rumors, but they do not want to get involved, and they avoid it like the plague because they don't want their careers to be destroyed. Because whatever cover story NASA puts out, they are going to protect it in some way, and they will attack anybody that will question that cover story. Like I have questioned the SDO eclipse season, and there is no way that that eclipse season is caused. I mean, that the images show that it is an eclipse. And I have been talking about that for many months. But
yeah, I find the whole story, the whole NASA story about the SDO eclipse season. I never heard of anything like that until last year. And then they actually came out and publicized it and talked about it. But yet I don't see anybody from the NASA Space Agency, the JPL, the European Space Agency, with everything that's going on out there, all of the videos that are being made, all of the YouTube channels, all of the websites. Don't you think that these space agencies would take a few minutes and have a press conference to the world and say, listen, everybody, there's a huge hoax going on around the planet. People are talking about this theoretical planet Nibiru or planet X, blah, blah, blah. Don't you think that they would come out to our non-existent space weather agency that was placed into office through an executive order last year, but we haven't heard a damn thing about it? No one's come out and said nothing. No press conferences, nothing. They leave it up to the trolling operations to come in there and wreak havoc on the information that's trying to be divulged. So I find it very, very odd that, you know, nobody of authority is coming out and saying, hey, listen, you know, this is fake news. But yet they're diverting our attention everywhere else. On a crazy election, you know, a crazy election here in the United States for, you know, over a year. Then the election campaign, you know, just filling our heads and our eyes and our ears with all of this, you know, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton and the whole 9 yards. And now we're still being pelted with it. And I think it's just one complete diversionary program to keep everybody's eyes and ears on another subject other than what we're talking about here.
That's right. Yes, I agree with you, Scott. But going back to the astronomers, you see, it's very easy to destroy an astronomer's career. All you have to do is say, don't allow any of their papers to be to pass the referees, so they don't get published. And an astronomer's career is built on publishing papers. If you don't publish papers every year, your career is ruined. And the other way it can be ruined is astronomers will have to come up with project proposals and say they want to do some observations at a certain telescope. So they'll write down a proposal, and it's submitted to the directors of that that instrument, and it's either accepted or not accepted. If the proposals are never accepted, they can never do their research. They can never do their research. They can never write papers. So they can get into big trouble without even trying it. That's why most astronomers just stick to their field and stick to their little niche in astronomy, and astrophysicists will do the same with their little niche in astrophysics, and they'll do a little bit of research, do their publications, get together at conferences, do a couple of publications, and so go on. That's their lives. And in a way, I feel sorry for them, because there's such interesting stuff going on in the solar system, and they're basically refusing to do it. But from talking to my own colleagues that are astronomers, I know that they know that there's something going on, but they don't want to say anything. And
but they'll sit down and have,
the way it is.
Yeah, they'll sit down and have a cup of coffee with you and maybe talk about it off the record, but they're not going to put anything in paper. They're not going to expose the name or put their name and their credentials behind it.
That's right. Or they will say, no, look, I'm not an expert in this area. I mean, really, if I'm looking at images from SDO, you don't have to be an expert. Everybody can see that when you see different percentages of the sun at different frequencies on images with the same timestamp, that logically it cannot be an eclipse. And when you see the corona shrinking as the percentage of the sun that you see is less and less, there's no way. If it was an eclipse, the corona will be covered, not shrink. So there's no way that these images reflect the fact that it's an eclipse that's happening. The sun is going dark. I know it's a crazy idea. Most physicists will think, how can the sun go dark? Because the theories we've been taught are wrong. The observation is the sun is going dark. Now we have to come up with new theories. That's the way it works. But the powers that be don't want us to. Yeah.
So I wanted to jump in. You mentioned that the sun was going dark in all wavelengths of light, right?
Yes.
And that the corona was shrinking, where I guess the thinking from the opposition is, okay, well, there is an SDO eclipse season. Okay. What I'm thinking is happening is that the SDO was launched to hide the sun darkening cycle. What is your feeling on that? Because it appears that you've been able to calculate every 6 months, which it's right on the nose. It's exactly aligned with the SDO eclipse season, where the sun goes dark, where you had mentioned in the different wavelengths where it fades at different times in different wavelengths. If it was just the SDO eclipse, that would not be possible, because each wavelength would fade at the exact same momentum, size, and percentage. That's not happening.
Yes.
Okay. To make sure I emphasize that.
So that's absolutely correct. So the sun is going dark at different rates at different wavelengths. And what I found is initially I didn't realize what was going on, because they don't update the visible light images. They only update it every hour, whilst the other one is updated every minute or so, the other ones. But the sun is actually going darker first in visible light. That's what I've discovered. So the visible light emission is more affected than even the ultraviolet emission. But it's also going dark at different rates at the different ultraviolet wavelengths. And that is why you get images of the sun with different percentages. If you go through the images in the different wavelengths, you can see, and you can compare, you can see that it's going dark at different rates for different wavelengths. So that shows you it cannot be an eclipse. If it was an eclipse, you would see exactly the same percentage of the sun at every single wavelength and would go dark at exactly the same rate for wavelength, because it would be the Earth covering a portion of the sun. How can we then have the Earth at different positions with respect to the sun in different wavelengths? That is not possible. So that is why it cannot be an eclipse. And the corona is the same thing. If the Earth was simply covering SDOs of the sun, it would cover the corona. The corona wouldn't change. It would stay about the same size. It would simply be covered by the Earth. But what we see is, as the sun, as the darkness increases across the face of the sun, the corona shrinks at the edges and it gets darker. And it sort of retreats as the sun gets darker and darker. That is absolutely not an eclipse. There's no way an eclipse will cause that. What causes that is the sun going dark. It's the only possible explanation.
Now, there we have a few people that have some questions that are in our live chat, and
okay.
we also have a special guest in the live chat, but
okay.
we are not going to give this amateur any more time. But a lot of the folks in the live chat, they all pretty much have the same question, and we've tried to address this question quite a bit. And their question is, okay, well, if such a large object is within our inner solar system, why can we not see it? And, you know, we've gone over a lot of the information pertaining to the brown dwarf stars not emitting light. However, it has come to me in some information that I actually publicized a few days ago, that an astronomer, astrophysicist, scientist has discovered that a brown dwarf does have the ability to, I'll just use the terminology, rekindle its energy and emit light. So we know that's possible. He proved it. University of Delaware professor. The information's out there and it was published. So the big question is, the objects that we are seeing in the sky, we have a lot of pictures, thousands and thousands and thousands of pictures. Some of them can be explained, some of them cannot. But for instance, would we ever be able to see this object behind the sun, above the sun, below the sun? If the sun was illuminating it and it was a very large object, do you think that we would be able to actually capture some pictures of these objects?
Well, if the sun is illuminating it, the thing is, the object that's close to the Earth, if it's between the sun and the Earth, all it can do is cause a shadow on the Earth's atmosphere. And I have written extensively, because I've dealt with this question as well. Why don't we see these objects all the time? They are there all the time. But the thing is, the powers that be have certain technology that hides these objects. And I have written about the sun simulators because, as far as I know, it's the only explanation why we don't look up and see them all the time. They are basically being hidden from us. Just like SDO, as you mentioned, was meant to cover up the fact that the sun was going dark, and they used the fact that the object around which the object that passes by the sun causes to go dark has a 361-day period, which I've calculated. It's a 361-day cycle. So it's, of course, 4 days early every single year. So you don't need to do any more calculations once you know what its period is. So just like SDO, yeah.
You have to accommodate for leap year. For every leap year, you have to accommodate for those days as well, right?
Yeah, that's why in my paper I will say 361 plus or minus 1, because the error in my calculation is 1 day. Okay.
And I interrupted you. What were you going to say? Go ahead.
Okay, so SDO is used to hide the fact that the sun is going dark. And they knew that this object had a 361-day orbit, and they worked out that they could use a satellite, which they needed anyway, because they needed to see what was going on with the sun. So I think that they come up with different ideas about how to hide the different objects. And they have a multi-factored kind of program to hide them all. But what they cannot hide is the color of the clouds at sunset. Have you seen peachy red clouds? Have you seen blue clouds? Have you seen red clouds? These are not normal. These have to be illuminated by objects that are outside the atmosphere. So we know that these objects are out there indirectly this way. This is how I started thinking about it. But yes, they hide them. They must be using lenses in the atmosphere or propelled in the atmosphere or in orbit. I am not sure. Perhaps they use both.
Let me ask a question.
Yeah.
So totally besides SDO or sun simulators, we'll just set that aside. You could very easily give me a list right now of probably 15 different ways you have been able to explain or identify the fact that we have other objects here, more potentially being a brown dwarf star and a brown dwarf, etc. Things like plasma ejections, the sun jolting, the sun going dark, the phenomenon between the protons and ions where it's black and white, the envelope of gas, the gas cloud.
That's right.
You've also mentioned helium core and hydrogen core brown dwarfs. Can you maybe give us some more details on that?
Okay, so over these months, I have written about everything that you've just mentioned, Chris, from the electrical interaction that I saw in SETI images, where I saw this dust or this gas cloud sort of gathering in a certain path and connecting to objects that were having plasma ejections above the ecliptic at the upper edge of the image. And I've analyzed a lot of SETI images in all these months, and I have come up with all kinds of reasons why there is a brown dwarf star. I know I'm kind of overwhelmed by the fact that I've actually found a picture of it, but this is what I've used for months, is trying to explain what is happening in these images. It has to be that something is causing the sun to interact with it in this way. So I came up with electrical interactions, as you mentioned. And there was a whole lot of other things from the SDO. That's what started it all, where I decided there has to be an object that's causing the sun to go dark. And what was the other ones you mentioned, Chris?
The sun jolting, plasma ejections, star auras.
Yes.
Well,
the sun jolting is very interesting. You would never think that a huge object like the sun would spring like that. But you can actually visualize two magnets coming together or two oppositely charged objects coming together and repelling each other. So obviously, if the sun is reacting like that, something's causing it. That reaction, an object has to come close to it to cause it to jolt like that. So it springs away from the eye. It must be a massive object. It's not just a little planet that's causing the sun to do that. It's a very massive star of at least the same mass as the sun. And well, and maybe it's not even about mass. It's about its electrical potential. And so it's got the same basic electrical potential as the sun, and as they come together, they have the same electric field, basically the same charge, and they repel each other. But they don't keep moving away from each other. That's where the strong force comes into it. And the fact that these objects are attracted to the sun, that has to, what I've decided has to be the strong force. And yeah.
I was going to mention as well, one of the reasons that is discussed heavily as to why we do not see these potential objects is because that they're emitting infrared light, and that our eyes are not able to see the infrared wavelength. Can you touch more on that and explain a little bit more about how that works? Thank you.
So I believe that what we have here is probably a whole lot of brown dwarfs that the sun encountered in its travels across the galaxy. And obviously these brown dwarfs were part of one huge group. And as the sun came within their region, they were attracted to the sun. and they started moving into the solar system. And these brown dwarfs were probably all just emitting infrared radiation at the time. They were dark. That's why when they came into the solar system, we did not see them. They then approached the sun, started orbiting the sun, and started absorbing radiation from the sun. And then eventually some of them, and it could be that even more, are still coming into the solar system, because I made a calculation where I saw that one brown dwarf at least, and it must be a very strong interacting brown dwarf, must be between Jupiter and Saturn. And I did this calculation, I think in October of 2016. So they may still be more coming in towards the sun, because they obviously are still some beyond the inner solar system. That's why the Earth is being hit by these particles, because the sun is connecting to these, probably to these brown dwarfs, as well as the ones on the inner solar system that all be beyond the Earth's orbit. And then the flux of particles goes right past the Earth, and the Earth gets hit by it. So they started out just emitting infrared radiation. If we have an object right close to the Earth and it's just emitting infrared radiation, there's no way we're going to see it. If this object starts having plasma discharges in its cloud, we may then get different color emission from the cloud, which may affect our atmosphere. It may be visible in our atmosphere. And for years, we've seen that at night. We've seen things like yellow atmosphere in the middle of the night. And that could either be one of the stars emitting this, it's almost like a dirty yellow color, or it could be just from the plasma discharges that's in the cloud surrounding these objects. So that's right. Infrared, we human beings cannot detect infrared radiation. You need a special detector. Yeah.
What were you going to say?
Now, I was going to say that in the 1980s, there were reports that an infrared telescope was launched, and it saw some objects. And I believe these were the brown dwarfs that were by then starting to come into the solar system that they saw.
Didn't NASA recently release imagery of brown dwarfs that populate the galaxy? Like, they're all over the place. They did a contrast, one wavelength of light, and then another picture in another wavelength, and it exposed, literally millions of these little guys are all over the place.
Yeah. Apparently, this is new knowledge, because they examined the surveys that have been taken of different parts of the galaxy. And then when they analyze it, they see all kinds of objects. And they see these brown dwarfs because they don't emit a lot of light. And what I mean is, and they're talking about brown dwarfs. They're not necessarily talking about brown dwarf stars. I differentiate between the two. Although the similarities between them is that both kinds are very difficult to observe because they do not emit a lot of visible light. So there are similarities and there are differences between the two types of brown dwarfs. And that's why I wrote an article about this, to differentiate between the two. The brown dwarfs they're usually talking about are substellar objects that are between a gas giant and a small star, whilst the brown dwarf star is an object that was a main sequence star once, and it's now an old star. It no longer has enough fuel to power thermonuclear reactions, and it has cooled down enough to the point that it only emits infrared radiation. Or well, it may still emit a little bit of visible light, but not much.
There was I'm sorry, go ahead. There was one subject that I wanted to touch on, and a lot of people are asking the question, and I don't want to scare people, like, because we're always referred to as fear mongers. These guys are fear mongers.
Or that we're a cult.
Yeah, well, yeah, we're a cult. Yeah, we're not out there eating babies and drinking blood. But one of the main subjects is, and this is just going to be a straight-on question: if the Earth were to experience a very close call with a brown dwarf star within our solar system, and made somewhat of a magnetic portal connection with this brown dwarf, what do you think the initial reaction would be from the Earth? What do you think would actually start to happen? Because I know this wouldn't happen immediately, but in the worst case scenario, what do you think would actually happen to the Earth? Because there's so much talk about crustal displacement and a physical pole shift where the Earth can be tilted over on its axis and possibly rebound and regain. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, like I said before, I don't think it's a gravitational interaction as much. A gravitational, if it was all about gravity, we'd expect something extremely dramatic to happen. But we know these objects are around, and we haven't had these dramatic things happen to Earth. But what has happened is the core, the mantle, warms up because of the magnetic interaction. And so what we see happening, and is actually what has been happening for a few years now, for quite a few years, is we have more earthquakes, we have more volcanoes erupting, we get strange weather, we get electrical effects like tornadoes increasing, like lightning increasing, and we get increased radiation from these objects being around because they emit radiation. They emit X-rays. They emit, if they are having nuclear reactions, again, they will emit gamma radiation. They emit radiation. The Earth will get hit by more radiation. And radiation from ultraviolet to X-rays is damaging to living organisms. So, of course, species on Earth are going to be more and more endangered. And we're going to see massive amounts of animal die-offs. And we're going to see earthquakes and volcanoes. All these things have been happening. And I don't think the ultraviolet radiation is sometimes off the charts. And it's not from the sun, because the sun is emitting less and less ultraviolet radiation. So it's got to come from these other objects in the solar system. So basically, this is what we would expect. And I'm not saying that we will never get a crustal displacement. But already we see that the Earth's magnetic field is being affected, that it's weakening, and that could be because the sun is weakening, because there seems to be a connection between the Earth's magnetic field and the sun's solar wind. There is some kind of interaction there, and the sun is weakening. So also, as the sun weakens, the solar wind, the amount of solar wind weakens as well, and that means more cosmic radiation comes from outside the solar system and also impacts our planet. So there are all kinds of factors that we see are happening right now. And as more and more of these brown dwarfs start, it may get worse, but we may not necessarily get a huge dramatic effect unless we start being plummeted by asteroids, say, because these objects obviously brought in a whole lot of debris. And some of this debris can come close to our planet and impact it. So
that was going to be my next question.
Yes.
Because we've seen such an uptick in this meteor activity, and asteroid activity, near Earth objects, and all of a sudden, I believe this really started in 2013 with the incident in Russia, Chelyabinsk, with that meteor exploding. Thank God it exploded over an uninhabited area. But as of lately, we've just seen this massive increase in meteor activity. And I mean, one of my biggest fears would be, our planet being hit by an extinction level asteroid. And again, this is something that's I don't think that we actually have the technology to protect ourselves. But then again, I can be completely wrong because we don't fully know or understand what our governments actually have out there. But do you think the increased activity in these meteors and these coming out of nowhere asteroids, do you think this is possibly part of the brown dwarfs in our solar system attracting these objects?
Yes, I definitely think there is a connection. I think that as these brown dwarfs came into the solar system, they dragged in with them all kinds of debris, asteroids, comets, and so on. And that's why we're getting hit, or, well, they're coming by at quite a rate, and they're being discovered at quite a rate. And it's abnormal. We've never had so many of these objects in the solar system before. And it's not just because our power of observation is getting better, because we've had telescopes for a very long time. And nowadays it's actually more difficult to observe them because our skies are being blocked by the technology in orbit. So I don't think it's to do with the fact that we have better technology and so can find them better. I think there are just a lot more of them, and it's to be expected. I mean, the brown dwarf stars have to come in through the Kuiper Belt and places like that. And of course, they would attract some of these objects and bring them with them. It could be that they were part also of a system that had a lot of debris in it as well. We do know, well, I've studied the fact that stars sometimes fission because they are electrical objects, and if they become unstable, they fission. They are also able to eject metallic material from their cores. Sometimes it's like fission. So it could be that these objects already had rocky and metallic parts in them, and therefore these were part of the system. Either way, we know that they probably brought in these objects.
But there was one other question that I've been getting quite a bit for the last couple of days since people knew that you were going to be coming on with us, and a lot of it has to do with the actual Earth wobble, the way that the Earth wobbles on its axis. Is there the possibility that the Earth's distant reaction to the possibilities of this brown dwarf or brown dwarfs being in our solar system, would that actually increase the wobble of our Earth? Because I've had several people that were trying to actually calculate. I really didn't understand what they were trying to, well, I do understand what they were trying to do, but I just didn't understand how they would do this. They were talking about the equator that runs through very specific regions all around the Earth. Some of them in Brazil and in Ecuador, and that some calculations have been made that the position of the equator has actually moved.
Yes.
It has actually moved to the point where that is actually proving that something is pulling on one of our poles. Now, that was something that, they didn't have a lot of information, credible information, but the theory and the thought that went into my mind, because, there is a model that shows the wobble of the Earth since I think 2013 has steadily increased and has actually gotten more profound. So what are your thoughts on this Earth wobble, and is there a calculation that could be made if the equator is actually moving?
Well, I haven't actually looked at that, but that's to be expected. Basically, that's the same thing as saying that the Earth's rotational axis has changed, and that I've actually written a little article on that, and that's what you would expect, because don't forget the Earth used to orbit one single star. That was the central star in our system, like the nucleus of an atom, and the Earth was an electron to this nucleus. So now what you have done, we have a whole lot of other protons, other stars have come in, congregated around the sun. So our solar system, the nucleus of our solar system has changed. And because the nucleus of our solar system has changed, it has to change what the planets do. So it's likely that all planets have changed their orbits and have changed their rotational axis. All planets in the solar system. So of course, we on the Earth would notice it a lot more. The fact that other planets have changed is probably being hidden from us, but it is absolutely what I would expect to happen. Now, to calculate exactly what effect these stars are having would be an interesting problem to look at. But then I would have to actually know how many stars there are, and I'm not sure how many. I know there are a couple, perhaps 5.
Oh,
5 stars.
Yeah, I know.
Even more.
I know that.
I don't even know. Yeah.
I know at one point me and Chris were talking one day, and we were trying to figure out. Okay, we know where the the equator is, and how can we find out the coordinates from, say, for instance, 5 years ago, where the equator was running through this one area in Ecuador, and now how can we calculate where it is right now? And then that is a subject of probably some pretty good mathematics, and that is definitely not my forte. But taking a look
I could definitely look at that.
Yeah, and taking a look at everything that's been going on, very erratic movement with our jet stream this past winter. And I mean, even now, I mean, I'm not a meteorologist or a climatologist, but you can see these very erratic movements with our jet stream. And I was just wondering, it's my theory that if we were under the assault of our planet being forced into this severe wobble, would that in fact start to upset our jet stream in the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere, therefore causing a lot of this absolutely crazy weather? I mean, I know where I live, all through the month of December, January, and February, where we should have absolutely freezing cold temperatures, tons of snow. The temperatures were in the high 50s and 60s. The day after Christmas, it was 62 degrees. So some areas of the northeast part of the United States didn't have a winter at all. However, if you go just a little bit further north, they had absolutely horrendous weather. And then people in the north central part of the United States back in December and January, I mean, they were just, the weather was hideous for them. But it just seemed like that jet stream was so erratic. And then now we have the issues coming with all of this crazy weather hitting the state of California and jeopardizing everyone that lives in that state with, severe rain, then extreme heat that's going to melt the snow caps in the Sierra Nevadas. It's just one thing after the next. And then somebody coined the phrase, welcome to climate chaos. So do you think that, the possibilities of this interaction with these objects is creating a lot of this?
Definitely. So the two things that are affecting the weather is, of course, the wobble, because it affects how much sun the Earth gets. The wobble itself, I think, is an electrical effect. And weather is an electrical effect. That's why it's electricity, electrostatic electricity, that causes clouds to form at a certain altitude, and and it will then cause high pressure regions and low pressure regions, and so the jet stream changing is also because all these other objects close to the Earth are having an electrical effect on the Earth. So of course it will affect its weather, because it's an electrical effect as well. Not that that's part of conventional physics, but I have realized that that must be how it works, having decided that the electrical interaction is much more important than the gravitational. So yes, I would expect, of course, weather to go crazy, because our planet is possibly all these stars that are going around the sun, and they are passing closer and further away from the Earth and affecting it in different ways. Whilst it used to have an almost circular orbit around the sun and be just influenced by one star. Now it's got a whole lot of them to cope with, so it's going to throw things out quite a bit.
So within all of your observations, over the course of the last 6 to 9 months, everything that you've observed, everything that you have learned, and everything that you have researched, do you see any immediate end to what's occurring, or do you actually see things progressing, in a fashion where it's going to become more of a threat for our planet?
Well, I see things progressing slowly. I don't see an immediate extinction level event that suddenly happens and most of the world's population dies. I don't see that happening at all, unless we get hit by a large asteroid. That can come from anywhere.
Yeah, that's.
But I don't see it.
Yeah, that's been one of my biggest fears. You know, that's been one of my biggest fears is, you know, I mean, these objects are just coming out of nowhere. And, you know, I understand that, you know, there's, I mean, the technology and, you know, I've listened to a lot of what the JPL has had to say about these near Earth objects. And I mean, it seems like their statement's always the same. Oh, you know, we didn't see it. It came from the direction of the sun, you know, and then next thing you know, this object is right on our doorstep and there's nothing that we can do. You know, the biggest fear would be for one of these, you know, large objects to, you know, impact in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And that would send, you know, a teardrop effect, a reverberation across the entire Atlantic Ocean. If something like that would occur in the Pacific Ocean, God forbid, I mean, that would literally wipe out, that would wipe out all of the South Pacific. You know, that would impact China, the whole Asian coast, Russia, and, you know, the Alaskan coast, the Canadian coast, the South American coast, and God forbid, you know, the west coast of the United States and Mexico. So, I mean, our planet is covered by more than 70% water. So, you know, just based on the laws of probability, that object would more than likely impact into one of our oceans. And that would be a catastrophic event. And that is something that I fear the most is one of these impacts and not having any time whatsoever to prepare. And that's why a lot of times when I am doing my videos and I am giving out the information, you know, one of my main goals is to make everyone understand you need to maintain this level of information coming in, because it seems to me that each and every day something new occurs, something that we have to watch and pay very close attention to, but also in the same aspect, we have to be prepared. We, you know, I don't care if it's just minor preparations, having an evacuation plan, an emergency plan set up with your family, having resources to, you know, fresh water, food, medical supplies, a means of protecting yourself, because at any given minute, these things can happen. They can just explode, and next thing you know, you're homeless. You don't know where your next meal is going to come from. You don't have fresh water. You don't have any clothing. You have no shelter. And there is complete pandemonium and mayhem.
Yeah.
So, you know, when I do mention to everyone, please have a, you know, a preparation, have a plan of preparedness. You know, if you know that you live in these earthquake zones, or you live near volcanoes, or you know that you live near coastal regions where a tsunami or flooding would be detrimental to your survival, you and your family. So please, you know, this is what we're really getting at. You know, yes, researching these objects, finding out the truth, but also, you know, preaching the preparation. And there's nothing wrong with it. Because if you just take a look, just a few months ago, the situation in Oroville, when they started to evacuate, almost 200,000 people. You know, some of the testimonials from the elderly people were very sad, because they were stating that, I didn't know what was going on. Oh, there was nobody to help me. Oh, I didn't know where to go. You know, I didn't have a blanket. I didn't have transportation. And then for people that live in, you know, California, hey, you know, they have mountainous regions, just like the rest of the country, but it's not that easy to just escape from this flood zone. What are you supposed to do? Just jump over the Sierra Nevada mountains into another state? No, it doesn't work like that. Highways jammed with traffic, people not knowing where to go, what to do. And we cannot rely on the police, the fire departments, you know, safety workers, rescue workers, because, ladies and gentlemen, if you decide not to evacuate and then you get stuck, you're now putting those rescue workers in jeopardy of trying to save you. You know, and just with this big threat of Cyclone Debbie impacting the coastal regions of Australia, some of the first reports coming out where there were a lot of people, Australians are just tough-nosed people. They're tough people. They were saying, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not evacuating. And with the threat of a monster storm coming in there, There were people that were going to ride it out. And I myself, I mean, I lived in South Florida for 22 years. I've been through 13 major hurricanes, and I am guilty of the same thing. I was going to attempt to ride out Hurricane Andrew, which was one of the most devastating hurricanes to hit South Florida. I got out 2 hours before the storm hit, but yet I was stuck on Interstate I-95 for 4 hours. I did not move but 3 miles. That's it. And thank God that storm took a turn to the south and 60 miles, or else, you know, I might not be here to have this discussion today. You know, all of our prayers are with everyone that are being impacted in Australia right now. Just before we went on the air, I was able to get a report on what's happening there, and it's very, very sad. There is going to be a tremendous amount of destruction for the people that live in these areas of Australia. I hope and I pray that no one loses their life, but I believe that as we move into the month of April and May, getting into the summer, I think we're going to have a hell of a lot more of this climate chaos. So we're going to be wrapping things up here. Does anybody have any last words? Dr. Chris, either of you two?
Well, I just thank you for having me, Scott, and letting me have my say.
My pleasure.
Yeah, thank you, Doctor, for coming on, and thank you, Scott, for hosting this. I think this is awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this was something that everyone kind of needed. You know, there's a lot of you know, backseat drivers and, you know, these armchair quarterbacks that, you know, they want to give their 2 cents on this subject. But when you sit here today and you listen to an individual that has the credentials, the education, the observations, and that has done the research, you have to really sit there and start to think. You really have to start thinking about everything that is going on around this world. And when you start to put it all together, you can clearly see that we're living in the sign of the times. And I mean, that is the truth. And what is happening is kind of disturbing. It's kind of confusing. It's very upsetting. But at the same time, ladies and gentlemen, this is the time to make sure, once again, that you're prepared, that you're able to take care of yourself, take care of your family. And, you know, if God wants you at any particular time, we all know that he's going to open up the door and welcome you into heaven. So we don't know when our last breath will be. And I've made it the rest of my life goal, whatever time I have left on this earth, I am going to dedicate it to finding out the truth. It's beating me up mentally and physically, but I believe that all three of us here today are strong enough to take it and to accept it. And, you know, I mean, if this is what I was placed here on earth to do, to be a little bit of a shining light on people and try to awaken them, well, so be it. I thought by now I would be retired and I'd be fishing every day, you know, and my work schedule would be, hey, wake up, have some coffee, enjoy my day. But I've been cast out of that and cast right back into 12 to 14-hour days, 7 days a week, no social life. But hey, you know what? Every minute of the day that I sit in front of my computer and research and read and put these videos together for everybody, it does warm my heart that, you know, I know, Chris, you get fantastic emails from people thanking you. I get them every single day. And I just want to say that, you know, everybody, I'm not able to address and answer each and every one of your emails, but I do read them. I do read them. And there's no need to really thank any of us because, I mean, we're just doing what we were meant to do. And this, I truly believe that all three of us here today, this was our life. This is what you were placed here to do. I truly believe that. Any last words?
Yeah, I agree with you, Scott. I believe that we are seeking the truth, and God is truth. God is interested in truth. So we are doing things in line with who God is. And God is interested in telling people on earth the truth, what's going on. Because if these objects came into the solar system, they are part of the universe, and he's the creator of the universe. So he knows about these objects. He knew they were going to come. He created them probably. And it's probably to wake up people on earth to the times we're living in. We are living at a time where it's time to turn to God and not just seek wealth and your own pleasure, but to look to your own spiritual life, because that's what counts in the end. And maybe seeing these objects wakes people up to that fact that.
All right, Christopher, any last words, my brother?
I have to say.
Let the force be with you.
Yeah, let the force be with all of us. Listen, guys, I'm going to go ahead and end this broadcast. I want both of you to just stay with me here online. I'm going to end this broadcast. And ladies and gentlemen, for everyone that sat through all of this and listened, I thank you very much. And we will probably have some more gatherings like this. And just stay tuned to Chris's channel and my channel, and our doctor of physics, our professor. She is going to continue to bring us as much information in her observations as possible, and we will bring that information to you. So once again, I'd like to thank all of you for watching, and make sure, stay informed and stay tuned. Take care. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Planet X News. This is Scott from the Nibiru channel. I'd like to welcome all of you. I have my special guests, Chris Potter, and hello. I have our physicist on board. And we're going to have a 2-hour discussion, and we're going to cover a lot of material dealing with Planet X, my investigations and research. The same thing will apply with Chris, but mostly we want to center our attention on all of the research and all of the papers that have been written by our physicist. And she holds a PhD and also a doctorate, and this is a very, very educated lady. He has been teaching and lecturing for over 17 years at a major university, and she deserves all of the respect that we can give her pertaining to this subject. The respect for just her accomplishments as an individual and her education. So we're going to be referring to her as Doctor, and we're going to be referring to Chris as Mr. Potter. So what's happening, Chris? What's happening?
Not much. I'm excited to be here. Myself, you, Steve Olson, Arlene Steiger have been the voice of the physicist, the doctor, and this is our first opportunity to allow her to speak and share, her experience. Because I think that that's going to bring a lot of power to this subject and clarity. And also it will allow her and validate her work. I think that we haven't had an opportunity to really do that, where she can represent herself in her own forum. So I'm really excited to be here today.
Yes, yeah, I absolutely agree. Yeah, I absolutely agree. I believe that she deserves the respect and the platform to, at least voice her opinion and her studies and her research. So we're going to start touching on a few subjects. But first, I don't want to go directly into the Planet X or the brown dwarf investigations. But ladies and gentlemen, I want you to open up your eyes, and I want you to listen to me very, very carefully. Now, going back a few weeks ago, this lady and her job, well, it was in jeopardy, simply because the trolling operations that are conducted on YouTube every second of the day, anything that has to do with the truth, anything that has to do with Planet X, as we call it, there are these factions that try to shut it down. Now, these are very well organized operations, ladies and gentlemen. These are not just some geeks sitting behind a computer with nothing to do. We've uncovered this information back in September of 2016. I covered it again in November of 2016. I covered it again in January of 2017. And the fact of the matter is, there are several countries that participate in this kind of secret operation. They actually have a handbook, and we exposed that handbook several months ago, and I guess it kind of put a bad taste in their mouth. Well, we'll leave this one individual's name completely out of this, but an email was sent to the university where she works, and they tried to actually have her fired. After 17 years of teaching, after 17 years of, her education and employment and establishing herself, she started to notice things in the sky. Things were changing. So she started her own investigation, much like myself and Chris and many others that are on YouTube. And we take a lot of abuse each and every minute of the day, but that's okay. We can deal with that. But whenever you go after someone's career, that is saying something. That is saying one thing and one thing only. That now all of a sudden, there is someone with a super education, credibility, that is stepping up and bringing a lot of this information to the forefront. This email was sent directly to the university, and the information that was sent into this email was rather damning and ignorant. So we've worked on that. There is no longer a threat for this beautiful woman's job. And we're going to continue to uncover and investigate and research this information. Number one, because we have the right to. Number two, it's the right thing to do. That's the bottom line. So no matter what occurs, we are always going to be threatened. We're always going to be under the gun of being shut down by YouTube or whoever. And they've come after my channel. They've come after Chris's channel. They've gone after many, many other channels on YouTube. I just received an email 30 minutes before this broadcast that these trolling operations are now going to target Mike from Around the World, VP Earthwatch, Pastor Paul Begley, the Higher Truth channel, and a few other channels. They've basically created a hit list. Now, ladies and gentlemen, why would people go to these extents to shut down a YouTube channel and shut down a flow of information? I mean, that right there has to tell you something. We're not just making videos for the hell of it. We're making videos and producing this information so the world population can see what's occurring. So we're going to get right into a little question and answer. Doctor, how are you today?
I'm fine, thank you, Scott. Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. Absolutely my pleasure. What I wanted to first ask you is, in one of our conversations, you had mentioned, how you walk and you've started noticing different things in the sky, the pink sunsets, which we've all seen pink sunsets, but then you started to notice other things. So I'm going to go ahead and give you the floor for a few minutes and let you begin from your beginning.
Okay, so what I was doing is I was walking. I was just having my normal walk at sunset, and I noticed that as the sun was setting, that everywhere else, north, east, west, the sky was not like it was supposed to be. It looked red. All around at the horizon, it looked red. And the clouds at sunset were strange colors. They looked very red. And I thought, this is not right. This is not the way things are supposed to be. This looks like there are other objects illuminating these clouds. This is what I thought. And this was around July, August last year that I started noticing this. And I thought, this is very strange. This is not normal. And then one day I actually saw an object up in the sky. And it quickly got covered. I did know about chemtrailing before that, but I didn't realize that hiding these objects and chemtrailing was connected. So this object just went behind the clouds, and I thought, wow, I just saw something that was not supposed to be there. And then I started looking into it. I started trying to find out if other people were seeing this anywhere else in the world. And then I came across Steve Olson, and I started watching his channel, and I started seeing what other people were seeing. And I started thinking about it. I mean, my training in physics allows me to look at certain observations and come up with deductions. And that's how I started. I didn't plan to. I just wanted to find out what was going on. And then I started writing to Steve and making some suggestions. And eventually I started writing articles for him. And then Chris was interviewed by Steve, and I started watching Chris's channel, and I thought his pictures were amazing, absolutely amazing. I mean, there were pictures with 3 stars in them. And I was amazed by these pictures. And then I saw that Chris was continuously attacked by the fact that people were saying these were lens flares. So one of the first articles I wrote for Chris was the one about lens flares. And I was hoping to help these people that were putting out this information that no one else seemed to care about. It was not in the media. And this seemed to be an extremely important thing that was happening in the solar system. So I went on from there, and I started thinking more and more about what was going on. Eventually, I got to the STO eclipse season. And that to me was the turning point, because I realized that these images were showing that the sun was going dark. It was not being eclipsed. So when I realized that the sun was going dark, I thought, but if according to the theories that I learned and that I teach my own students, it is impossible. The sun is powered by thermonuclear reactions. There is no way it is ever going to go dark. So I realized that the theories that I have to explain what powers the sun are wrong, because I believe that normal physics should be driven by observation, not theory. Nowadays, though, most physicists will deny an observation because it doesn't go with the theory. But I don't believe that's the way physics is supposed to be. So when I realized that the sun was going dark, I realized that the theory was wrong, and I had to come up with a new one. And I also realized that there must be an object that is causing the sun to go dark. And from there, I started thinking about brown dwarf stars that mainly emit infrared radiation and are quite dense. And I started thinking about the electric theory for powering stars. But I realized that stars have to be powered by a combination of electricity and thermonuclear reactions. But the thermonuclear reactions have to be on the surface of the star, not in the interior. So that's started. From then on, I started building up my theories and writing more and more articles. And I believe Chris has now about 90 of them. So I could say I've become a prolific writer. I cannot say that I ever planned to. I just desire to understand what is going on. And I have come to the conclusion that there are several stars around the sun, that the sun seems to be attracting these stars. Some of them are brown dwarf stars. I have examined an image where I could see there were about 3 of them in this image. And I always recognize brown dwarf stars by the fact that they are dark, and possibly they may start emitting some visible light because of being in the solar system and absorbing energy from the sun. But they are always enveloped in a cloud of ionized gas. because that's what's left from them going through their white dwarf stage after being a main sequence star, going through the red giant phase, and then reaching the end of their lives by running out of nuclear fuel. They then release their outer layers of gas, and this outer layer of gas is basically plasma. So what is left around the star is this gaseous cloud of plasma that does not glow as much as it did when it was part of the star, because the star doesn't have the power or the fuel anymore, but it's still ionized, and you can still get it to illuminate and discharge. You can still have plasma discharges across this cloud. And the most interesting, the most mind-blowing thing for me was discovering the 2007 footage of that object that traversed the sun. Because that object, when I looked closely at that image, was dark and enveloped in a cloud of ionized gas. And to me, that was proof, mind-blowing proof, that what I had been thinking was happening was actually happening. This was really a picture of a brown dwarf star. Now, you have to remember that these kinds of brown dwarf stars that I'm talking about have actually been removed from, because the literature now says that you go from a white dwarf star to a black dwarf star. The brown dwarf star in the middle is not even mentioned. Instead, people talk about brown dwarfs, which are substellar objects that are more like gas giants like Jupiter than anything else. These are not objects that were ever main sequence stars and became brown dwarf stars. That's why I differentiate between the two objects. There's the brown dwarf, and I believe there is probably at least one of them amongst all these objects that have come into the solar system, because they are pictures of a striped object or large planet. But the main culprit for what's happening in the solar system and to our sun is the extra stars and the brown dwarf stars that have come into the solar system. So I don't know what else you want me to talk about, but this is my main, I concentrate on this. This is what's leading my thoughts. I don't even want to call it research. I never intended it to become a research project. I simply wanted to understand and help people understand what's going on in the solar system. And the powers that be are trying to hide it from people.
Well, there's absolutely no doubt about that. There is no doubt that they are trying to hide everything. And I just want to make one quick comment. Yes. I've read probably more than half of your research papers, and I've been following Chris, and we became friends, and we've collaborated on this subject. And after watching and listening to his presentations and listening to the papers that you have written, I would have to say more than 90% of it is directly my thoughts also. However, yours are a lot more scientific than what I could ever come up with. But after getting to know you over the last few weeks and being able to speak with you and get to know you, I can clearly see that you have the same passion that all of us have. And that's just we're seeking the truth. We are in a very damning situation as far as humanity. I mean, the bottom line is we're not going to save the planet, but at least we could get the word out and start to awaken people to what is exactly happening around the world. Because mainstream media, I don't really want to get into all of that, but the mainstream media, we really can't believe they're not going to go out there and investigate this like we are. But one thing that I do want to touch on, and I've had a lot of emails over the last couple of days, and we have a lot of people, other people on YouTube that claim to have credentials, and they call themselves amateur astronomers, and that whole gambit. But what I wanted to ask you is, if you don't mind, discussing your education level, from heading into college and acquiring the degrees and the education, and that way we can give everybody a good sense of
Yes.
your qualifications to speak on this subject.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Scott. Well, maybe I should start with my school education. My parents moved around a lot. So I never went to one school for more than 2 years, to international